Over the past few years, film photography has came back from the dead like a George Romero zombie. Millennial hipsters like myself have flooded the hobby and saved film photography from going the way of Betamax. So much so that until COVID reared its ugly head, Kodak Alaris had seen year-over-year growth up until the year of 2020. And in fact, it seems poised to return to that now that COVID is mostly behind us. I believe that there are a number of existential problems facing the hobby of film photography going forward, and unless we do something about them, they could lead to the end of the hobby, leaving film photography confined to the pawn shops of history. In this video though, we're not just going to point out the problems that could lead to the end of film photography, but we're also going to attempt to find some solutions. But make sure you stick around to the end of the video to see what I believe is the biggest problem facing film photography. But let's get to the first one. And I touched on this in a relatively recent video on the channel where I talk about the prices of film cameras, and I believe one problem facing film photography long term is the lack of newly manufactured film cameras. I believe that the lack of newly manufactured film cameras is a cancer growing inside the hobby, that if manufacturers don't step up to the plate and start offering new cameras, could eventually metastasize and lead to the end of the hobby. With film photography's rebound going on for the better part of a decade now, we have seen a few options brought to market by camera manufacturers. The only trouble is these newly manufactured options seem mostly consolidated to the lower end of the market. You can see on my shelf back there, I've actually got a few of them. The Rito ultra-wide camera, the Lomography simple-use disposable camera. Most of the cameras that are being brought to market now are these low-end options. And there are only a few companies offering cameras that even have the pretense of being cameras for professional use. Intrepid, the wooden 4x5 manufacturing company, they are bringing decent cameras to the market, in addition to Leica, who has recently announced their new M6. But without support of major manufacturers bringing real usable cameras, Nikon, Canon, Sony, it's unlikely that film photography ever returns to any serious professional use, save for a few outliers. And the problem with there being no newly manufactured high-end film cameras on the market, that's driving the prices of the cameras that do exist up. Have you seen the prices of the Hasselblad 500 CM lately, or the Mamiya 7 II? They're out of this world. So without any new cameras being brought to market, we can expect the prices of these existing cameras to continue to increase, especially if the current trajectory of the hobby continues to hold and more people continue to come back to the hobby. And my worry there is it kind of leaves film photography broadly in kind of an instax space. The only cameras that would be on the market are those cheap, semi-disposable plastic cameras out there marketed towards beginners and casual photographers. And there won't be a lot of landing spots for us more serious photographers. And so that's one problem, is that there aren't enough newly manufactured film cameras on the market, and that could present real problems down the road for the film photography hobby as a whole. So what do we need to happen to fix this? Well, I think it's pretty simple, and that's we need major manufacturers to jump back on board and start making at least a film camera option. Nikon only recently discontinued the F6. One would hope that it wouldn't be that difficult for Nikon to maybe bring that camera back to market. The same goes for Canon. And at this point, I think that there's enough proof of concept. There are tons of people in the hobby. You know, film sales are continuing to increase. I think there's enough market there to justify testing the waters and introducing a film camera and seeing what happens for these major manufacturers. But that's what we need to happen to fix this. Hopefully, over the near future, we will have some manufacturers jump back on board. The new Leica M6 is a good step in the right direction, but let's be clear, there's only so much market for a $5,500 35mm camera. So we'll see what happens over the next 5 to 10 years. Hopefully we get some major manufacturers back on board, and hopefully that will mean that film photography will be with us for decades to come. Another issue with film photography, and one that will have to be addressed as we continue into the future, is the health and environmental impacts of film photography. As the sea levels continue to rise and unfortunately all the polar bears die, we as a species are becoming more collectively aware of the environmental impacts that we are having on the planet as a whole. And make no mistake, this is a really good thing. As more and more of us turn to driving Toyota Priuses, Nissan Leafs, and Teslas, and we put solar panels on our roofs, we are hopefully all becoming more aware of the things that we can do to minimize our environmental footprint. And the hobbies that we ultimately choose to partake in are no exception to this. Sad to say, but there are a few objectively bad ways that film photography affect the environment negatively. One of which is the materials used in the manufacture and the creation of these films. Lots of times these are really weird, really toxic chemicals that they use. Recently, Fuji had to discontinue one of their most popular films, and that's Fuji Velvia 100, because the chemicals used in the production of Velvia were no longer permitted to be inside the United States. So, pretty serious stuff. While Fuji argued that these were tiny trace amounts of bad chemicals, points still stand. A lot of times the manufacture of these so much do involve some pretty sketchy chemicals. So film manufacturers need to step up and make sure that the chemicals that they're using in the production of these films are environmentally friendly. And this comes in the form of research and development. And I think unfortunately, at least for Fuji has stopped developing consumer film long ago, separate and apart from Instax. They do still make Instax stuff, but the R&D is not going into developing new consumer film stocks. We aren't going to see a new version of Velvia 100 from Fuji that complies with the environmental regulations. Manufacturers are going to have to be proactive about this. So if we want film photography to continue to exist, and that's what happened to Velvia 100, Fuji also had a similar issue pop up years ago with Fuji Acros, and that's what led to the introduction of Acros 2. Fuji slightly changed the formulation of Acros 2. This allowed Fuji to be able to continue to secure materials used in the production of the film and to continue selling it, and you can still buy Acros 2 today. So without the help of manufacturers, new environmental regulations could lead to some hardships for film manufacturers, and if they're not doing the R&D on the back end, you will see more and more films discontinue. Another issue affecting the environment is disposable cameras. In a world where there are places that have banned straws, I think it should come as no surprise that having a fully disposable camera is not the greatest solution for the environment. To say nothing of the disposal of the plastic involved in the film, but also the disposal of the batteries. And while the use of disposable cameras has fallen a long way from their peak in the early 2000s, disposable cameras are still a popular landing spot for folks who want to dabble in film photography. And it turns out, just buying a camera to throw it away is not the most environmentally friendly solution. Another environmental issue associated with film is the chemicals used in the development of film. There's no way to sugarcoat this. Many of the chemicals used in the development of film are toxic. Just straight out, they're toxic. Film labs all over the country use varying levels of caution with respect to what they allow to wash down the drains. To make sure that we still have labs out there to deliver our film to get it developed, labs need to be complying with regulations to make sure that they are doing everything by the book so they don't come under increased heat from the government. I will concede that taken separately, none of these issues associated with the negative environmental impacts of film are probably going to be the death knell for film photography. But you can see there are quite a few issues. And when the counter argument is moving to digital, where the only issue is you're producing electrons and you're putting them on the computer, a very, very clean setup, film photography is objectively more wasteful. And we don't want the hobby coming under too much scrutiny from folks arguing that it is very wasteful and it is very polluting. So those are a few things that would be really nice to clean up. That way we've still got film photography as a hobby for many years to come. All right, we are at the last and what I believe to be the most significant threat to film photography as a hobby, and I'm gonna call this section doing an Instagram. And I will give you a little bit of a warning here. I think I may be administering the black pill to some folks for photography as a hobby, because this is a very negative topic and this is something that I worry about. This is what keeps me up at night, right? I'm a weird guy, right? This is probably my most pessimistic take on the future of photography. I want you guys to think back to a world 5 or 10 years ago where you're taking wonderful photos outside, you'd see something really cool, you'd post it on Instagram, and that picture would get 50 likes, 100 likes, 1,000 likes, right? People just loved hopping on Instagram and browsing all the wonderful photography that was taking place in the world. I'll ask you this question. When was the last time you got on Instagram and looked at photography at all? I'll answer. It doesn't happen for me very often. And this is a really sad thing. Instagram used to be such a fun and interesting place to share photos, but now if you look at Instagram, it's almost entirely a curated feed of short-form video content. You look at the social media networks more broadly and the short-form video services that they've created, Facebook, Instagram Reels, and TikTok. I don't think it's very controversial to say that this short-form video content that's being created now, just extremely engaging. Anyone with a TikTok account knows that it's easy to lose 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, just mindlessly scrolling the little videos that are played. So why is all this happening? Why is the world seemingly turning almost entirely to video, and photography seems to be getting left on the wayside? I'm sorry to say, but video is just more engaging. I mean, what are you doing now? Are you listening to me talk about photography, or are you looking at my photography? I don't believe that doing an Instagram is just an existential threat to film photography. I believe it's an existential threat to the hobby of photography more broadly as a whole. I think we're heading into a world where people just don't value photography as much as they used to did. And a really pessimistic view here is that photography continues this trend of becoming less and less important over time until video just completely overtakes it. Think about Fuji Velvia. We talked about it earlier in the video. Velvia is unique because it's a slide film. Think about what that is. A slide film was meant to be demonstrated, right? You had a projector and you would have family over and friends over, and you put a white sheet on the wall or whatever, a screen, and project those images onto the wall and everybody would view them. And that was deemed to be an okay way to spend time. That was an engaging medium for folk. And I'm gonna sound a little bit like Bo Burnham here, but everyone has everything all the time in front of their face, on their phone. I turn on TikTok and I have photography and I have dirt bikes and mountain bikes and bikinis and recipes all at my fingertips, and as much of it as I want to see for as long as I want to see it. And you know what I'm finding holds my attention less and less over time? Is photos. And I'm just afraid that there's no way back from this. If the current trend of devaluing photography continues, most of us won't have work, and if it continues even more, we may not even have a hobby as a whole. And I think if we're being honest with ourselves, we probably realize this. Try starting a new Instagram photography account with 0 followers. I think you're gonna find it's pretty tough sledding. So there, I think that we've painted the landscape sufficiently bleak. What on earth could we possibly do to fix this? I think it should be very clear at this point. Support the photographers that you like. Share their pages. Use photographer-friendly apps. Buy your gear from photography stores. Sell prints. Sell your customers' prints. So let me know in the comments what you guys think. Is photography facing an existential threat from video sharing apps? Or am I full of crap? But before you go, check out this video where I talk about what Kodak is doing to help the film revival. Until next time, we'll see you.